There's something nobody tells you about getting older. The more you give away, the more tangled things become. I found that out the hard way, not once, several times. My name is Annie. I'm 81 years old, and I spent most of my life believing that openness was the same thing as closeness. That if I just told the people I loved everything, every worry, every plan, every dollar, every ache, they would feel trusted, and I would feel less alone. What I didn't understand then, what took me decades to figure out, is that there's a difference between honesty and oversharing. And learning that difference, well, it changed the last chapter of my life completely. I remember the first time I really understood this. It was a Thursday afternoon. I'd had a dizzy spell earlier in the week. Nothing serious, just stood up too fast from the kitchen chair. Happens when you're 81. Happens when you're 40, really, but nobody panics about it at 40. I mentioned it to my daughter Linda during one of her visits, offhand. The way you'd mention the weather. By the following Monday, she'd arranged a doctor's appointment I didn't ask for, called 2 of her siblings, and was suggesting I move the bedroom furniture closer to the bathroom. I stood in my kitchen in my house, feeling like a child being managed. She loves me. I know that. Every single thing she did came from love. But love, when it's frightened, can feel a lot like control. And I thought to myself, standing there by the stove, what did I open exactly by saying those 40 words? That was when I started paying attention. Now, I've thought about this a long time, and I'm not here to tell you to lie to your family. Lord, no. Honesty matters. It always has. But honesty and privacy are not opposites, and somewhere along the way, I confused them. So let me share with you 5 things I've learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, are better kept close to your chest after 60, not because they're shameful, not because family can't be trusted, but because there are some parts of your life that belong only to you, and guarding them isn't distance, it's dignity. The first one is money. Now, I know what you've heard. Get everything out in the open. No surprises. Transparency keeps families together. I believe that too. I did. Years ago, I was in my early 70s. I sat down and laid it all out. Not dramatically, just practically. What I had saved. What the house was worth. What I'd planned to leave and to whom. I thought it would bring relief. That everybody could stop wondering. That we could all move forward knowing where things stood. What happened instead was quiet, the kind of quiet that changes the temperature of a room. One of my children started asking questions about the house. Shouldn't I think about selling? Market was good. Did I really need all that space? Another one began calling more than usual, and I noticed, in a way I hadn't before, that the conversations had a direction to them. They'd start somewhere light and drift somewhere financial. And then there were the distant ones. People who hadn't called in 2-3 years, suddenly very curious, very attentive, very present. I sat with it for a while before I understood what had happened. The moment I opened that door, I stopped being just their mother. I became a situation to be managed, an estate to be anticipated. And that, right there, was when I promised myself never again. Your money is yours. Every penny of it was earned through years of showing up, staying late, skipping things you wanted, giving to people who needed it more. Nobody else lived those years. Nobody else earned that right. Have a will, absolutely. Make sure the legal side of things is settled. A power of attorney, someone you truly trust to handle affairs when the time comes. That's not optional, but the details. What you're leaving and to whom and how much. That's not a preview anyone needs. Not now, not early. Because once the numbers are out, they stop seeing your life. They start seeing what comes after it. The second thing is your health, the small, everyday kind. I want to be careful here because there's a real distinction worth making. If something is serious, a diagnosis, something that changes how you live, something that will need real support, of course your family should know. Of course. You deserve help when it matters, but every stiff joint, every night of bad sleep, every twinge and ache and mourning that takes a little longer to get moving, you don't need to broadcast that. Here's what I've seen happen and what happened to me. After my dizzy spell, just that one small mention, Linda started watching me differently. Not cruelly, not consciously, I don't think. But she started noticing things she hadn't noticed before. The way I moved from room to room, how long it took me to get up from a chair, whether I was eating enough. I noticed her noticing me, and something shifted between us that I didn't know how to shift back. Because here's the truth. Once you give someone a reason to worry, they take it with them. They carry it into every visit after that, and slowly, gradually, the image they have of you changes, not because you have changed, but because of one thing you said on one ordinary afternoon. You become fragile in their eyes before you're fragile in your own. I've always taken care of myself. Quiet walks in the morning, regular doctor visits. I know my body well enough by now to know what's a passing discomfort and what's worth worrying about. I don't need a committee to make that determination. And I'll tell you something else. When you constantly talk about what hurts, it starts to shape the story you're telling yourself about your own life. Every conversation becomes about what's declining. Every interaction becomes an update on your deterioration. That's not who I am. And I'd wager it's not who you are either. You are more than your aches, much more. Talk to your doctor. Keep track of what matters. Take care of yourself seriously and privately. But with family, be thoughtful about what you share and when. There's a difference between being honest and handing someone a reason to limit your life. The third one took me the longest to learn, staying out of family arguments. I grew up believing that keeping peace was a virtue, that if you saw trouble between people you loved, you stepped in, you mediated, you smoothed things over. You spoke your truth and hoped it landed right. What I know now is that the opposite of that is closer to wisdom. A few years back, I won't go into all the details, 2 of my children had a disagreement. It had been building a while, as things do. And I made the mistake of saying something, not harshly, not taking sides, I thought, just offering perspective, just trying to help. Both of them pulled back from me afterward, not from each other, from me. I had become, in the space of one conversation, someone associated with the conflict rather than someone above it. My words, my gentle, careful, well-meaning words, had become part of the argument. And I spent months wondering how that happened, how trying to help had made things worse. Here's what I concluded after a lot of quiet thinking. Family members don't hear your words the way you mean them. They hear them through everything that came before. Old hurts, old alliances, old silences. What feels like neutral wisdom to you arrives wrapped in 30 years of history on their end. So you're just trying to help lands as taking sides. Your concern about a grandchild's behavior lands as criticism. Your gentle observation about someone who borrows and never returns lands as stirring the pot. I'm not saying this to be discouraging. I'm saying it because I've lived it enough times to know it's true. You do not have to attend every argument you're invited to. That was a revelation for me. The idea that an argument could exist in my family without requiring my participation. That I could love people completely and still choose not to be pulled into the middle of their difficulties. I trust you to work it out. That's a full sentence. That's a complete response. The steadiest people I've ever known weren't the ones who involved themselves in everything. They were the ones who remained calm while everything swirled around them, who you could call in a crisis and find unchanged, unrattled. That's who I want to be, who I'm still working on being, honestly. There's a kind of peace that comes from protecting your position as the still center of a family. Not the manager of it, not the referee, not the fixer, just the person who remains. Who can always be found in the same place with the same heart without an agenda. That's not staying out of it out of cowardice. That's love from a better distance. The fourth thing is regrets. This one surprised me when I finally understood it. I'm 81 years old. I've made choices I'd make differently. I've put things aside I should have held on to. I've stayed in situations longer than I needed to and left some things too soon. That's just a life, a full one. And sometimes that surfaces, not as misery, just as reflection. A thought on a quiet morning, a flicker of something while I'm doing the dishes. About 2 years back, I mentioned something to one of my grandchildren, Aaliyah, who was visiting and asking me a lot of questions about my life, the way young people sometimes do when they're genuinely curious. I loved those questions. I loved that she wanted to know. But I said something. I don't even remember exactly how I phrased it. Something about how I'd always wanted to see more of the world. How there was a period in my life when that might have been possible, and I'd stayed because family needed me, and sometimes I thought about that. I meant it as a small, honest thing, a piece of the truth of being human. She got very quiet. And later I understood, though she never said it directly, that what she heard was something different. She heard that the family, the staying, the choosing of people over dreams, that maybe it hadn't been worth it. That maybe we hadn't been worth it. That was not what I meant. Not even close. But that's the tricky thing about regrets. What feels like honest reflection to you, just you thinking out loud about the texture of a life, can sound like an indictment to the people standing inside that life. When you say, I wish I'd done more of this, they hear, what I have wasn't enough. You're not saying that. But that's what they feel. I've learned to keep those thoughts in a different place now. Not buried. I'm too old for burying things, but held close. Reflected on privately. Talked about with Denise sometimes, my neighbor who has a way of listening without needing to fix anything. She'll stand in my doorway longer than she intends to, and I'll say something honest, and she'll nod and say something short and practical back, and somehow that's enough. Not every truth needs an audience of people who love you. Some truths are just yours, and keeping them that way isn't dishonesty. It's mercy for them and honestly for you. Because the more you speak regrets aloud in front of family, the more you start to inhabit them. They start to define your story. I've lived too full a life to be defined by the parts I'd do differently. I'd imagine you have too. Oh, and speaking of keeping things close, I tried one time to write some of my thoughts down in one of those little journals. Bought it at the pharmacy. Flowered cover. Seemed like a good idea. 3 days in, I found I'd written the same complaint about the neighbor's wind chimes in 4 separate entries and hadn't noticed. If my memory was a person, I'd have let her go years ago. Lovely woman. Not reliable. The 5th and final thing, and this one matters, is your plans for what you leave behind. Now, I know what people say. Have everything in order. Don't leave family guessing. Make sure they know what to expect. And yes, you should have a will. You absolutely should have a legal plan in place. Someone you trust with the paperwork, with the decisions, with the things that need handling when you can't handle them yourself. That part is important, and I don't want to minimize it. But there's a large distance between having a legal plan and turning your final years into an open negotiation. I've watched this happen to people I know. Well-meaning people who thought that sharing their plans would bring clarity, would prevent conflict, would show their children they were being treated fairly. And instead, within weeks, sometimes days, the whole tenor of their relationships shifted. One woman I knew, a careful and generous woman who had built something real over a lifetime. She laid everything out for her 3 children. Who was getting what? How the house would be handled, which pieces of furniture would go where. She told me afterward, I felt like they stopped seeing me, like they were looking past me at what was coming. That's not the relationship you want with your children in the years you have left. Because once the numbers are out there, once people know what's coming, they start seeing your choices through that lens. Why are you spending money on that trip? Becomes a different question when they know what the account holds. Are you sure you need that? Takes on a different weight. Your freedom to enjoy the life you built gets quietly, gradually eroded. You worked for those resources. You sacrificed for them in ways nobody watched and nobody will ever fully know. The right to decide what happens with them and to live your remaining years without defending those decisions, that belongs to you. A will is not a negotiation. It is not a document meant to be previewed and discussed and reacted to while you're still here to be pressured about it. Do the legal walk. Choose someone you trust absolutely. And then live. Live generously. Live thoughtfully. Live as you see fit. Because here is something I believe with my whole heart. The legacy that matters most has nothing to do with bank accounts. It's the way you showed up day after day. The patience you extended when you didn't feel patient. The things you kept together when everything wanted to fall apart. The presence you offered without condition. That's what people carry forward. That's what Kayla, Denise's daughter, who sometimes walks with me in the afternoon, will remember about the time she spent near me. Not anything I gave her, just that I was there, that I listened when she had something to say and didn't push when she didn't. Your presence is the inheritance, the real one. Make sure you're too busy living it to be explaining it. I'm grateful this morning for the quiet, for the light that comes through the kitchen window around 7, the way it's done for years, landing on the same corner of the counter. For the fact that I've lived 81 years and still have mornings like this. No questions, no agenda, just the day beginning at its own pace. I'm grateful that I learned, even late, that some things are mine. That holding on to them isn't selfishness. It's the last form of self-respect available to you. The understanding that your life, your thoughts, your plans, your small daily pains, and your private reflections, they do not owe themselves to anyone. I spent so many years believing that giving everything away was the most loving thing I could do. What I know now is that keeping something for yourself, protecting the quiet center of your own life, that's not withdrawal from love. It's what allows you to keep giving it, not from a place of exhaustion, not from obligation, but freely, with something left. Thank you for sitting with me today, for letting an old woman talk her way through something she's still learning, even now. If you want to come back and sit a while again, I'll be here, just like always. Take care of yourself, whatever that means to you.